Trevor Loudon is an author, filmmaker, and public speaker from Christchurch, New Zealand. For more than 30 years, he has researched radical left, Marxist, and terrorist movements and their covert influence in mainstream politics. Trevor Loudon's thesis is that what is commonly regarded as mainstream political policy is in fact driven and guided by hidden subversive elements. The Democratic Party's consistent defunding of the U.S. military, Obamacare, the Iran nuclear deal, normalization of relations with Cuba, Islamic refugee resettlement, $15 minimum wage, fracking bans, pipeline shutdowns, and the push for illegal alien amnesty are all consistent with far left and Islamic agendas. Trevor Loudon believes that these forces must be exposed and countered, as America's continued role as a bastion of freedom is pivotal for the future of Western civilization. And I suggest you go to Trevor's website at www.trevorloudon.com/about. It'll give many of his accomplishments and also links to other information you should have. I was looking at that, and two of these accomplishments that I found interesting are he discovered the long hidden relationship between notorious Hawaiian Communist Party member Frank Marshall Davis and the young Barack Obama in 2007. And Trevor has addressed more than 400 conservative, Tea Party, religious, and Republican groups in more than 37 states. If you'd all welcome Trevor Loudon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? You understand the southern accent all right? Good, good. Yeah, look, I'd like to, a big thank you to the John Birch Society for inviting me here today. I've been reading JBS literature since the 1970s, and it certainly shaped my outlook and gave me a great head start in my own research. So anybody who's not a member, I encourage you to become a member, because it is an organisation, as Ken said, that without this organisation, I doubt we'd still be standing today. It's as simple as that. So I thank you all for your dedication and hard work. I want to start with a little story. I was in Los Angeles recently. Any refugees from California here today? Okay, thank you. I walked up to a street vendor. I bought some food, and the guy said to me, "You've got an accent. Where are you from?" I said, "Well, I'm from New Zealand." He said, "Well, where's that?" So to make it easy for him, I said, "Look, it's down next to Australia." He said, "Where Arnold Schwarzenegger came from." Which explains some of the voting patterns in California, you know. Now, people always ask me, they say, why as a New Zealander should I care about the United States? And I say there are two reasons. The first is gratitude. You know, my country was saved during World War II from invasion by the Japanese, by the massive sacrifice of your fathers and uncles, and the gentleman up the back, his father was at Guadalcanal. So basically saved us in the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway. And that's a very strong memory, people. Thank you. Now the second reason is related but a little more selfish. Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope for mankind. If freedom should ever fail in the United States, if you should ever lose your constitution, your liberty, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, all of which took a huge trashing through the Obama years, had that trend continued, we'd be living in a world run out of the UN building in New York, out of Moscow and Beijing and Havana and Cuba. And was that the kind of world you'd like to leave to your children, folks? So anybody who cares about liberty, anybody who cares about freedom, has to care about the United States, because this is, for all the problems you have here, this is still the capital of freedom on the planet. That's the reality. Now, I want to say a couple of things about the last election. I know this is not a partisan group in any way, but I lost the mic, did I? Can people, have I got it back? It's okay. Okay. Well, look, I want to say a couple of things about the last election. The first, does anybody feel there may have been a touch of the miraculous about that election? Yes. Okay. I think even an atheist would have to acknowledge that one. Because we all knew that Hillary had to win, right? It was preordained, it was inevitable, but it didn't turn out that way. But I think there are I think there are too many people on our side, not here, but on our side in general, who think because President Trump is in the White House, all is good and we don't have to do anything any longer, which is a very dangerous view of reality. I think what that election did, it didn't save America, but it gave this country a reprieve. It gave us a last chance. 100 years of progressivism have been dragging us down. We had one more shot. And if you look at the Old Testament, there was a lot of last chances, a lot of second chances in the Old Testament, but no third ones that I can remember. You know, they were given a chance. They were given a chance to come back on track. And if they did, that was great. If they didn't, there were consequences. And we are looking at that now. So I think we've been given a God-given opportunity. We've been given a bit of breathing space, and we have to use that breathing space to the absolute maximum. Now, the second thing I'll say about the election, I know how hard the people in this room work. You've been working for years, many of you. You promote literature, you organise meetings, you do phone banking and organising for candidates, and you're constantly writing cheques. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of thankless work. But was it all worth it on election night 2016? Yes. Would you do it again to get the same result? Well, hang on to that, people, because your work is not done. And I think there are greater victories ahead if we double down. Third thing I'll say about the election. The Germans have a wonderful word. It's Schadenfreude, right? And it means to take pleasure in the pain of others. It's not a very noble thing, right? You don't brag about that. But when you watched election night 2016, and about 2 o'clock in the morning when they panned the Democratic Party headquarters, and you saw those little snowflakes bawling their eyes out and hugging each other, did you feel a little touch of Schadenfreude? Well, I want you to hang on to that feeling, folks, because I want you to feel it again in 2018 and 2020 and 2022 and 2024 and beyond. We're at a crossroads for our country right now, folks. If we blow this, the consequences are very dire. But if we win this, which we can, I think the consequences could be very positive for our movement for some time. Now, my main work is what I call is national security. That's my focus. But I really look at the side of national security that very few organisations other than the John Birch Society ever bother with. Now, I know when you're in the military, you have to swear an oath to defend your constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, we know that foreign enemies are dangerous. They point guns at us and they wear uniforms or they fly bombs into our buildings, whatever. But which are more dangerous in the long run? An enemy over there pointing a gun at you, or an enemy wearing a suit and tie with their fingers crossed behind their back in your Congress or Senate, trashing your Constitution every chance they get? The enemy within is the most dangerous. Now, has anybody in this room, sorry about my voice, folks, has anybody in this room ever had to undergo any form of FBI background check to get a government job or a security job? Quite a few people in the room, right? And is it true those checks can be pretty rigorous? They'll interview your childhood friends. They'll check out your financial situation. They'll check out your family and relatives, your political affiliations, your criminal convictions, even bounce checks. Because they need to understand, they need to know that you're going to be working for the federal government, the government of the most powerful nation on the world, that has a history of using your traitors, your weak and dishonest, to betray you. So they need to trust you. I had a friend recently who applied for a federal government job. This is under Obama, by the way, sorry. He applied for a federal government job in Washington, D.C. The FBI sent 2 agents all the way to Canada to interview his communist uncle. Now, on the strength of that interview, my friend, who is a good conservative, was denied that job. Not because he was a communist, because his uncle was. And that was just too darn risky. And I actually support that decision, folks. I think that was the right decision to make. But what if you're a young Marxist radical like Al Green here in Houston, or Sylvia Garcia, who is going to replace the other Green, Jean Green? What if you're a young Marxist radical like Mark Vasey up in Fort Worth, or the Castro brothers out in San Antonio, or Lloyd Doggett in Austin? What if you're a young Marxist who hangs around with the Communist Party or Democratic Socialists of America? And we need to understand the Democratic Socialists of America now has 15 chapters in Texas. They've got 400 members in Houston, over 2,500 members statewide. The Communist Party has more than 200 members in this town. And they are backing candidates all over the place, folks. Plus they have their little front organisations they work through too. But what if you're a young person like this and you get elected to Congress and you get appointed to the Homeland Security Committee or the Armed Services Committee, and you have access to all sorts of government secrets and a whole bunch of influence? How much of an FBI background check do you need for that one, folks? 0. Right? Because the people are supposed to vet the candidates, right? And the media is supposed to help you do it, right? Well, how's that been working out for you, folks? 0. In fact, it's on the other side. It gives our guys a hard time and it gives their guys a break. So, you know, this has been going on for a long time. Like you've got the Congressional Black Caucus, for instance, about 40 members at the moment, was basically set up by the Cubans, and members of that caucus go down to Cuba on a regular basis. Barbara Lee has been there 22 times to work with the Castros so they can get trade and travel restrictions lifted on that communist state. So then they can send more spies and more terrorists and more drugs to your country. They are a key part of the drug trade into this country, folks. So what do you call it when somebody goes from your country to an enemy foreign country to help them against you? And what's the penalty for that one, folks? So why has it not been applied for probably 200 years now? You've had no traitors in your Congress all that time, right? Or in your Senate? So this has been going on for a while, folks. Any Vietnam veterans in the room today at all? You, sir? Well, thank you, sir. I'll say that. I want to ask a couple of questions. One of them is very stupid, but I think you'll see where I'm going. What was the Vietnam War lost in the jungles of Vietnam? No. Every veteran tells me absolutely not. So is it true that you weren't really allowed to fight to win? Yes. You know, you couldn't chase the enemy across borders in hot pursuit. You weren't allowed to invade North Vietnam or to mine Haiphong Harbour to stop those Russian and Chinese ships coming in. Is any of that true? And is it also true, well, here's a dumb question, did those restrictions in any way hamper your ability to fight and win that war? So had you been allowed to fight that war to actually win it, like you did in World War II, to take the fight right into North Vietnam, could you have won it and pretty darn quickly? See, look, at that time, and I got this from Admiral Ace Lyons, who was the head of the Pacific Fleet for some time, you had a Secretary of State at that time called Dean Rusk. Every night, Dean Rusk would get the bombing orders for North Vietnam across his desk for the next day. Exactly where your planes were going to fly and what targets they were going to hit. And every night he would pass that information to the Swedish embassy in Washington, D.C., who would give it to the North Vietnamese. So they knew exactly where your planes were going to be flying, so they could put their guns in exactly the right place to intercept them. That's how deep the treason goes, folks. No? So I say this, that war was deliberately sabotaged in your Congress by people like Father Drinan from Massachusetts, who are working hand in glove with the Communist Party USA, which was taking its orders directly from the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which was allied to the Communist Party of North Vietnam. Do you think there might have been a little bit of treason going on there, folks? And how many of those, you lost 58,000 young Americans in that war. Your high school buddies, your cousins, your uncles, your hunting buddies. I guarantee everybody in this room was touched by that war in some way. 58,000 young Americans were allowed to die unnecessarily in a war you were not allowed to win. I'm not saying it was a wrong war, it was a right war, but you should have been allowed to win it. And the casualties would have been a lot less. So, how many of those traitors in your Congress who sold your troops down the river, how many of them paid a single penalty for what they did, folks? One of them was Obama's Secretary of State, a man called John Kerry.
Traitor.
Now, sometimes known as Jane Fonda with less testosterone. And another one was John Conyers. Remember John Conyers? He was in Congress 140, 160 years. Had to retire last year, a little bit of disgrace. Well, John Conyers should have been in jail a long time ago, people. He was your single most treasonous congressman serving for many decades. He was the man, he was the head of the Judiciary Committee, the most powerful committee in your Congress for 40 years. He was the ranking Democrat on that committee when the Republicans controlled the House. He was the man who abolished your House Un-American Activities Committee, by the way, which was one of your last lines of defense in this country. And yet he was in a position, you see, you've got an organization in this country that was once a very noble organization, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And their job is to root out spies and traitors and terrorists from your government, is it not? But that committee, that organization answers to the Judiciary Committee, as does your Justice Department. That makes the Judiciary Committee the most powerful in your Congress. So on that Judiciary Committee, you've got right now, you have Judy Chu from California, who is a long-time supporter of the pro-Chinese Communist Workers' Party. She goes to China all the time. She is regarded as China's best friend in your Congress. And you should see Judy Chu whenever the FBI has the temerity to arrest one of the 25,000 plus Chinese spies currently working here. You are racist, she says. The FBI is a racist institution. You're only picking on these people because they're Chinese. And she has arranged for the FBI to have sensitivity training so that they're not racist anymore, so they don't go after these Chinese agents, because that would not look good. And then you have Luis Gutierrez from Illinois, who was the amnesty man, who was a big leader of the pro-Cuban Marxist-Leninist Puerto Rican Socialist Party. Not arrested, I'm Freudian slip there. Elected several times with Maoist communist help in Chicago, and a big friend of the Council on American Islamic Relations, the preeminent Muslim Brotherhood front group in this country. And then you have Jerry Nadler, who is going to take John Conyers' job over as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee if the Democrats win back the House. Now has threatened he is going to reinvestigate Brett Kavanaugh if he becomes the chairman, and he will lead the impeachment of President Trump. Jerry Nadler has been a member of Democratic Socialists of America, a Marxist group, since at least 1977. He is a hardcore Marxist, yet he may be the one that leads the charge to impeach your president, folks. How honest and unbiased do you think he will be? And then we go back to John Conyers himself. That man had a 50-year history with the Communist Party USA, 40 years with Democratic Socialists of America, 30 years with the Workers' World Party, which supports North Korea and Cuba and Iran. They are the ones who are ripping down Confederate statues and statues in North Carolina and Louisiana. And is also a big-time supporter of CARE and led the charge to stop your government designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. John Conyers was a hardcore anti-American Marxist-Leninist, as hardcore as you can get, folks, yet he oversaw the FBI for 40 years. What do you think's going to happen to the FBI's budget if they ever decide to investigate congressmen? Do you think the FBI is stupid enough to bite the hand that feeds it? The FBI has not investigated congressmen in this country since at least the 1940s. They've had once you're in Congress, you have free reign, people. So you get elected to Congress, there's no background check, no background checks whatsoever. The media is not going to touch you. And if the FBI ever wants to come after you, they've got to get past Judy Chu and Jerry Nadler and Luis Gutierrez and all of their friends. I'll give you one more example. You've got Andre Carson, one of your two Muslim representatives from Indiana. Andre Carson is heavily involved in several Muslim Brotherhood front groups. I've got it on tape in my movie. You can see this in his own words. He gets up in front of a big Muslim Brotherhood convention, front group convention in Connecticut in 2012. He gets up in front of the people and says this with a big grin. I understand there are people here watching us undercover. You are here spying on us because you believe we are here plotting to destroy this country. Well, I say to you people, then he really grins, I say to you people here undercover, Allah will not allow you to stop us. That man currently serves on the Intelligence Committee, folks, overseeing the CIA, the FBI, NSA, the whole lot, DEA, all 16 of your intelligence agencies. You have got at least 100 members of your House right now and 20 members of the US Senate at least who would have no prayer whatsoever of passing even the most low-level background check. These people could not be a realtor in Florida, folks, but they're serving on the Homeland Security Committee, the Armed Services Committee, on the House Senate Committee that just gave Brett Kavanaugh such a hard time. There are 10 Democrats on that committee. Every single one of them has a Marxist background. Every single one. No exceptions. Do you think they're ever going to let any kind of constitutionalist have any kind of say if they can help it? So that is where we are, folks. A quarter of your Congress and a quarter of your Senate at least couldn't pass a background check. They're so involved with the Chinese or the Iranians or the Communist Party or the Muslim Brotherhood, sometimes all of them, that they would have no prayer. Now I want to talk about, we talked a little bit about the inside thing, but you have another threat that I think is probably your biggest national security threat right now. And it ain't Russia, and it ain't China, and it ain't Iran, and it ain't ISIS or Al-Qaeda. All of those are threats, or North Korea. All of those are huge threats. But the thing that could do your country in more certainly than anything else, and it's right on your horizon, is illegal immigration. Right? And I want to explain why I say that, because we don't often talk about it in national security terms, but it is a national security issue. This is an invasion, people. Absolutely an invasion. So the whole push started out in California in the 1950s when a young radical moved from San Antonio to Los Angeles and joined the Communist Party. His name was Bert Corona. He got a whole bunch, he moved right up through the Democratic Party. He was a good friend of Bobby Kennedy's. And he got a whole bunch of money from Saul Alinsky in Chicago. I'm sure you've all heard of good old Saul. And he used that money to set up a whole network from Texas to Southern California, across your southern borders, of support groups for illegal aliens. To encourage them across the border, get them work in factories and farms, get them settled on this side of the border. Now, he died in 2003, but he trained a whole bunch of acolytes to carry on his work. And they have, especially in California, they have transformed that state, and the spillover is transforming your nation. There's a little group of three of them that are particularly powerful. The first of them is a man called Antonio Villagrosa, a hardcore Marxist, used to go down to Cuba to cut sugarcane for the Castro brothers. He was the mayor of Los Angeles for many years. He is the man who made LA a hardcore sanctuary city. He forbade the LAPD from enforcing immigration laws, and the illegals flooded in to LA and Orange County and transformed those regions. The second member of this little group, you may have heard that California granted driver's licenses to illegals recently. Well, the man who did that, plus many other things, was a Communist Party supporter named Gil Cedillo, who was the Democratic head of the California State Senate. Third member of this little clique, most powerful woman in California, in my opinion. And I'm not talking about the Kardashians or anybody like that, okay? The most powerful woman, her name is Maria Elena Durazo. She serves on the Democratic National Committee. She's a hardcore Marxist, and she was head of the California AFL-CIO, the unions. So she was the one behind the massive union-driven and union-paid-for Latino voter registration drives and get-out-the-vote efforts that added hundreds of thousands of new Latino voters to the California rolls in the last 20 years. And guess which party they voted for by about 5-1, folks? So this deliberate Marxist program has turned California from a reddish-purplish state to solidly blue. Totally rock-solid blue now. And that's a huge advantage to the Democrats when it comes to presidential elections, because they control the largest block of, electoral college votes in the country. And who controls the second largest block, folks? Texas. So where do you think they're coming next? Exactly. So now, the leader of the amnesty movement today is a man called Eliseo Medina. He's a member of Democratic Socialists of America. He was Obama's immigration advisor. Obama is openly, on our film, he talks about, I take my advice from Eliseo Medina. And he was the leader of SEIU, the largest private sector union in your country. Now, he is the man who got the amnesty bill pushed through your Senate a few years ago, and he did his darndest to get it through the House. And thankfully, thanks to the grassroots, he did not do that. But he's still pushing, he's still working hard. He works with people like Marco Rubio and some of your Republican senators to push DACA and push amnesty, etc. Now, but the thing is, why do they want this? What is the big deal for them? See, Eliseo Medina, again, I've got him on tape. You can see him in my movie saying this. In 2009, he gets up in front of a big progressive audience in Washington, D.C., and he says this: passing amnesty for our 11 million undocumented workers is the number one priority for the progressive movement. We have to get citizenship and voting rights for these people. If we stand by these people, they will stand with our movement. That will give us at least 8 million new Democratic Party voters. That will give us a governing majority, not just for the next few election cycles, forever. Now think about the consequences, people. The MIT just came out with a study recently saying there were 22 million illegals in the country right now. I've heard credible reports from INS staff that put it more like 45 million. But let's go with 22 million, right? That would give the Democrats 15, 16 million new voters right off the top. Mitt Romney lost his election by 2.5 million votes. Donald Trump won by about 200,000 thanks to the wisdom of your founding fathers and the Electoral College, and actually lost the popular vote by around 3 million. So in a country of 330 million people, elections are decided very closely. So you give the Democrats 15, 16 million votes overnight. What do you think that's going to do, folks?
Socialist domination.
Socialist domination. Why did Hillary Clinton promise to legalize every single illegal immigrant in the country within 100 days of taking office? That was her campaign pledge, people. It's because they love illegals, right? They love Latinos, right? You know, her husband, Bill, used to go on and on about illegal immigration, how bad it was, until they realized they were losing their own base and had to bring a new one across the border. So, basically, illegal immigration is the number one way of achieving a socialist one-party state in this country. You will lose Georgia and Florida immediately, and Arizona. Texas will be right on the edge. You know, it will not be long before they completely control this country. And they will have an unbeatable margin that can never be overturned. And if you think the Democrats are arrogant now, what do you think they'd be like with an extra 15 or 16 million votes in their pocket and the GOP permanently out of office?
Well, they promised to be civil then.
Oh, they will be very civil. See, that's the communists believe in peace, right? Peace is no opposition to communism. Then they will be peaceful. And this is the same. Then they'll be very civil and they'll be very polite when they put us in the gulags and line us up in front of the firing squads. It'll be done with a lot of decorum, and, you know, they'll be very pleasant about it, right? So that is your number one national security problem. This is the one that will destroy you more surely than any other. And I've got to say, I'm proud to be in a state where you have a senator, Ted Cruz, who's made a more hardcore stand on that issue than any other. And that is why they're gunning for him, folks. That is why they have to destroy him. So, I want to go back. Look at the current political climate. Has anybody ever seen as much hatred and vitriol directed towards a sitting president as this one? Even close, even remotely close, Reagan, you know?
Or even his supporters.
Yeah. It's never been quite so bad, right? So why do they hate him so much? Well, I think there are two reasons. The first is very easy to understand. It's very human. You know, the Democrats on election night, and please don't think I'm giving all Republicans a pass here. You know, I regard the Republican Party as about a third big government progressives, about a third patriots and constitutionalists, and about a third who couldn't tie their own shoelaces. Okay? And I know the good ones are here. And I know that third is what's standing between us and oblivion right now. And we got to nurture our good ones, folks. And but you know, the Democrats so believed their own propaganda on election night, they were so certain of victory, that when it all went south, they were like a bunch of kids who thought they're going to get the best bike you've ever seen for Christmas, and they got a pair of socks. And we all know that feeling, right? You know, bitter disappointment. Well, they should get over that in a week, right? They should. But they're still on about it, and they're getting worse and worse all the time. So what is the real deep reason? See, the Democrats, and I'm talking about the modern Democrat, not your next door neighbour who still thinks they're voting for Harry Truman and is basically a patriot and loves the country, but doesn't understand what's happened to his party. But the leading Democrats are all about identity politics. You are not an individual, you are part of a voting bloc to be manipulated in their service. See, the Democrats today think they own those white union guys out in Pennsylvania, right? They own the black community. They own the Latino community, a big chunk of the Asian American community, the Native American community. They own these blocks, and that's what gets them elected. And when they see President Trump going out to those white union guys in Pennsylvania and saying, so this is what NAFTA and voting Democrats done for you, right? All these closed down factories, all those high-paying union jobs, they've all disappeared. You've got poverty and dependency and meth labs to replace it. So this is what the Democrats have done for you. Well, we're going to rebuild the industry in the Midwest. You cannot defend your country without an industrial base. We're going to bring jobs back. And a whole bunch of those union guys said, heck yeah, and for the first time in their lives went into a polling booth and ticked the box for a Republican because they trusted him to deliver on what he promised. And when he went to the black communities, the inner cities, he says, so this is what 50 years of voting Democrats done for you guys. Unemployment, closed down shops, graffiti everywhere, drugs, crime, poverty. This is Democrat rule, right? Well, why don't you guys vote for me? What do you got to lose? And a whole bunch of them said, heck yeah. Black approval of President Trump now is 35%. That hasn't happened since Abraham Lincoln, people. It's a long way back. So they are freaking because they see that the base that gets them elected is crumbling. And if this president is successful, it will crumble a lot more quickly. It only takes 10 or 15% to peel off of the black vote to peel off the Democratic Party, and their position is almost impossible. Bring across those white union guys and some soccer moms as well, and they're done. They'll be out of office for a very, very long time. They are desperate. They're cornered rats. They understand they have to win the next two elections because if this president rebuilds the economy, builds that border wall, stops the flow of drugs across the southern border, and that's where 80% of your fentanyl and heroin is coming from that kills 60,000 Americans every year. If he can get on top of those problems, keep the taxes coming down and the regulations off your energy industry, so you drill your own oil and gas, not rely on Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, he understands that the Democrats will have very little to offer anyone. Because all I've got is poverty and dependency and abortion. That's really their platform. And that's not going to appeal to people who are making six-figure salaries and getting their kids into apprenticeships and, doing all right and living the American dream. That's why they hate it. You saw the State of the Union speech when President Trump said black unemployment is the lowest it's ever been. And the whole Congressional Black Caucus scowled because that's their base, crumbling away before their eyes. So they are really, really desperate, folks. And they're throwing everything at this because if they blow this election and the next one, they're history. They will split. They will crumble. You'll probably have an extreme left-wing party that will never get more than 10% of the vote, and you'll have a sort of moderate Democrat party that will get 30%, and they'll be history. So the Democrats have a plan. They always have a plan, right? And the first part is very, very obvious. Destroy the president. Impeach the president. Criticize. Hold him up. Ridicule him. Destroy his base, shut down all his Facebook pages, his Twitter accounts, anything that the base uses to rally the troops. Because they saw that they didn't take that last election seriously, folks, and they do not want to make that mistake ever again. So the first part is very plain, destroy the president. The second part is a little more subtle. But you'll see it play out. It's playing out in Texas right now. Who remembers the old Jesse Jackson Rainbow Coalition of the 1980s? Okay. Jesse Jackson, that great scamster, right? He ran for president twice, 84 and 88. Nobody gave him nobody even paid attention to him for a start. But in 1988, he got 7 million votes and fourth on the Democratic primary. Because what he did, he had the brilliant idea of getting all the minorities together into one bloc. The Rainbow Coalition. Progressive whites, progressive Latinos, progressive blacks, Asian Americans, Native Americans, gay Americans, Muslim Americans. So you got the yellow stripe, the green stripe, the lavender stripe, the red stripe, the brown, the white, the black stripe, the Rainbow Coalition. And this was his term. He invented this. But in those days, minorities were about 12% of the population. Today, they are 38% of the population. He was ahead of his time. Now, the Rainbow Coalition was run by Maoist communists, mainly the League of Revolutionary Struggle, which was about 3,000 members strong, pro-Chinese, hardcore communist group. They were the backbone of the Rainbow Coalition. Now, after Jesse Jackson abandoned it and went on to more lucrative scams, they all dissolved, and most of them went into the Democratic Party. Now, one of them was a young Stanford University law student called Steve Phillips, young black guy. He ran the Rainbow Coalition strategy amongst students on the West Coast. He was a full-time worker for all of 1988 for Jesse Jackson, took a year off his studies. And he learned a heck of a lot. About 1990, as I said, the League of Revolutionary Struggle dissolved. They all became Democrats. Steve Phillips married very well. He married his childhood sweetheart, a Stanford University sweetheart, a young woman named Susan Sandler. Now, she was the daughter of Herb and Marion Sandler, who had Golden West Savings and Loan, which was sold to Wachovia for $2.8 billion. It bankrupted Wachovia, and they had to join up with Wells Fargo. But anyway, they took their $2.8 billion and they put half of it into the progressive movement. They fund Centre for American Progress, ProPublica, a whole bunch of candidates around your state, around the country, around your state. Now, so Steve Phillips became the ambassador for all this money. He became, the son-in-law was like a mafia family. He was the man delegated to say where this money goes and who he works with. One of his first big projects was in 2005. He went to Atlanta, Georgia. They had a big meeting there with George Soros, Tom Steyer, Norman Lear of People for the American Way, and a whole bunch of other billionaires, where they set up the Democracy Alliance. Now, it's now 150 members strong, all the rich leftists in the country, and Steve Phillips is in there guiding where the money goes. And Soros alone has put $18 billion into the progressive movement in the last 2 years. So this is a lot of money, folks. The second major project Steve Phillips did was in 2008. He got $10 million together, which was chicken feed for them. And he did a mass voter registration drive in 18 mainly southern states and California amongst black and Latino communities. And he did that for a young senator from Chicago named Barack Obama. That is what got Obama ahead of Hillary Clinton. There would have been no President Obama without Steve Phillips and his buddies. Today, Steve Phillips runs a group called Democracy in Color, he runs several, the Sandler Phillips Foundation, Democracy in Color, Power Pack, and their job is to funnel money behind candidates of color, particularly in the southern states. See, Steve Phillips has written a book called Brown is the New White. You can look it up online, endorsed by Nancy Pelosi, endorsed by Barack Obama, and his argument is very simple. Democrats, you already have a majority. 23% of the electorate are progressive whites. They will vote Democrat if Adolf Hitler was on the ticket. They wouldn't care. 28% of the electorate are progressives of color. Latino, black, Asian American, Muslim American. 23 plus 28 is 51%. The new American majority. Google that phrase. You see it all over. So he's arguing, Democrats, stop wasting your money putting huge amounts of cash to try and get 2 or 3% of middle voters to flip to the Democratic Party. Put all of that money into mass voter registration drives and get out the vote efforts in the southern states where you have massive black and Latino populations who are pro-Democrat but vote in low numbers. For instance, in Arizona, Donald Trump won Arizona by 200,000 votes, but there were 600,000 Latinos in that state who could have voted but didn't. So now they are running a Latino candidate for governor, David Garcia, who is a Phillips protege, and they are pouring huge amounts into the Latino communities of Tucson and Phoenix and places like that. They're also backing Stacey Abrams for the governorship of Georgia, young black woman who's another Steve Phillips protege, and Andrew Gillum, who is a complete Maoist Marxist, for the governorship of Florida. And all three of these candidates are slightly ahead in the polls right now. I went to a meeting in Gainesville about 4 months ago, and I told them Andrew Gillum was going to be their candidate. And he was polling 9% at that time, and Gwen Graham was on 24%. And they all laughed. And he was under FBI investigation as well. But I said, he'll be your candidate because they are putting huge amounts of money and voter registration people into the slums of Fort Lauderdale and Miami and Orlando and Jacksonville, and they're getting the Puerto Ricans and the blacks to back Andrew Gillum. Pure identity politics, pure Marxist identity politics. So they're aiming to flip. They're really targeting 5 states. They're targeting North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Florida, and guess where else? Texas, right here. You know, Beto O'Rourke talks about, I'm not a socialist, right? You know, I'm a progressive Democrat, right? And I only take money from the little guy, right? I got $38 million in the last 3 months, right? You know, I'm the new Kennedy, you know. Well, Beto O'Rourke, you've got Steve Phillips is working with 2 organizations in this state. One of them is Battleground Texas, which has Joaquin Castro on its board. And they are putting millions of dollars into voter registration in Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas-Fort Worth in the black communities. They also works with Texas Organizing Project, which is the old Acorn, Texas, which is run by the Communist Party USA now, and they're backing Colin Allred up in Fort Worth against Pete Sessions, and they're pouring a huge amount of resources behind Beto. And I don't think they're going to beat Beto, but if they can get within 2 or 3 points, that's a huge victory for them. I want to see Ted Cruz beat Beto not by 5 points, by 10 to 15 points. Because that will scare the left off, they'll waste all their money, and they'll leave you alone for a few years, right? But if they get close, they get encouraged and they come back quicker. So Steve Phillips got this book out. He's basically saying Democrats don't go to the middle, put all your money into the progressive base, especially in the South. Now, Stacey Abrams says it very well. It's a little folksy little phrase. She says, Democrats, stop spending all this money to try and turn atheists into Catholics. Get the Baptists to go to church. Get the base voting. Get the base going. Now, you saw this play out. They've done it in Virginia. They've flipped Virginia already. And they did it in Alabama when Roy Moore stood in Alabama last year. See, Roy Moore should have easily won that, but he got in trouble. And Steve Phillips and his buddies put several $1 million into the state. They reactivated the communist networks that had been there since the civil rights era. And they started a vote or die campaign amongst the black community by telling them if you don't vote for the Democrat, the Klan is coming back. This is what they told them, seriously. And they won by 20,000 votes. And the head of CARE in Alabama, the Muslim Brotherhood Front group, boasted that it was the Muslims that put the Democrat over the top because they signed up 20,000 Muslim Alabamans and they all voted for the Democrat. So these are the kind of coalitions that are being assembled right now. They are hoping to flip Florida this election cycle and Arizona, and maybe Georgia, North Carolina next one, and Texas 3 or 4 election cycles down the road. That is their priority. So please do not think that Texas is completely safe and you don't have to worry about it. They said that kind of thing in California once too. And you can see the trends here. You can see the massive amount of money coming into the state, all the union organisers, all the community organisers working the inner cities, working the black and Latino suburbs in your main cities. They're doing it right now. So, and I want to tell you, the next part of the strategy, I want to tell you who I think they're going to run for president in 2020. Now, it's already been decided, so you don't have to, I'm giving you the inside dope so you can go to a bookmaker and put a bet down on this, right? So at Stanford University, Steve Phillips had a young friend, a black football player, and he was a radical, not an extreme radical, but he was a radical. And he befriended Steve Phillips, part of the crew, and Steve Phillips has funded and guided his career since. He made him the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and he made him the senator from New Jersey in 2013. That is Cory Booker, right? So that's one of the two. Steve Phillips also had a friend, a real radical at Stanford, a young woman who went on to take a top role in the Hillary Clinton campaign. Her husband, Tony West, on Steve Phillips' recommendation, because Steve Phillips was recommending all sorts of people to the Obama administration. This woman, her name is Maya Harris. You'll know her sister, Kamala Harris. Steve Phillips and Kamala Harris are, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris are Steve Phillips' proteges. He made them, he owns them completely. And you'll notice they're both gone to Iowa in the last couple of weeks. They're both positioning themselves to run. So the plan is this: destroy President Trump, impeach President Trump, take back the House in 2018, then run the Rainbow Coalition strategy in 2020 with Kamala Harris probably at the top of the ticket, maybe Cory Booker below her, and promise amnesty for all the illegal immigrants in the country, and win with 51, 52, 53% of the vote. And then amnesty, more refugee resettlement for the Middle East, and it's pretty tough to come back from that. Does any of this sound implausible or a little far-fetched?
Time.
This is, okay. So I'm ready to finish now.
Yeah, we need to quit.
Oh, right now.
Another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Just keep going?
Yeah. Okay, well, so what I want to say is this, very simply, we have a fork in the crossroads. We blow this next election, we are heading for major trouble. But if we win it, and President Trump can string 2 or 3 or 4 elections together in a row, the Democrats are decimated, the whole of the progressive strategy starts to crumble, and you imagine what we could achieve. President Trump has done a whole bunch of stuff with one hand tied behind his back. A very small minority in the Senate, and that's Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, who are basically Democrats. But you imagine if we can win 6 or 7 seats with real conservatives behind President Trump. That's Montana, that's Missouri, that's North Dakota, all good conservatives that we could easily win. So you imagine what he could do. President Trump's already pulled us out of UNESCO. He's already pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords, out of NAFTA, and he's pulling us out of the UN Human Rights Commission, right? Now, nobody's done that kind of stuff before. So I think if we can get him re-elected, we start putting the pressure on to get us out of the United Nations completely. You know? And I think we've got more chance of doing that under this president than any other we've had for a very long time. Another thing, right now you've got a 5-4 majority in the Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wants to retire. She wants to come to New Zealand. Well, we're prepared to take one for the team, folks. Right? We'll take her. Because that'll give you 6-3, and imagine what that's going to do for your First and Second Amendment rights. You imagine all the court cases you can take to get rid of a whole bunch of these unconstitutional government departments that now exist. We've got a great opportunity here. And one more thing. Jimmy Carter gave you one of the biggest curses you've ever had, still with us, the Department of Education. Wouldn't it be fantastic to pressure President Trump to abolish that department so all education goes back to the states? You know? Wouldn't that be doing your children and grandchildren the biggest favour you ever could do? So what I'm saying, folks, just this. You may not get involved in elections, it may not be your thing. But I think this coming election is the most important we have ever faced. I say that every time, but this one is. And so I'm speaking as an individual here. I'm going to do everything I can to get Ted Cruz re-elected with a big margin, and everything I can around the country to get more conservatives in the House so that we can keep the House, get behind people like Pete Sessions, stop Colin Allred beating him. I'm going to encourage people to write out checks, to get involved, door knocking, phone banking, whatever, because this is a critical time. This is the one time where our efforts are going to make more difference than any other. We blow this, we've only got ourselves to blame. But if we win this, and I believe we can, because I think that last election proved to me that God is not finished with this country yet, folks. If we win this, you'll spark an economic boom in this country like you've never seen. You'll spark a movement to restore the Constitution like you've never seen before. And you'll spark liberty revolutions not just in this country, but all around the globe, folks. Because we're all looking at America. And if America goes down, so do we. But if America recovers itself and restores its Constitution, that's going to inspire liberty-minded people everywhere. So if you win this, folks, if you double down and you win this, you keep this Make America Great agenda going on, you can have an economic boom and a liberty boom, and you can give your children not just the amazing country that you inherited, but one even greater. And you will look back at your time and the work you did with the John Birch Society through all the dark, hard times in America that you have all gone through, and you can be very proud that without you, we wouldn't have the great America that we could be having, folks. So I want to say to you all, thanks so much for what you do. Thanks so much for what you do for America, for my country, for the Constitution. God bless Texas, and God bless the JBS, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We have two services for a long time.